Well, I'm a firm believer of preparation and making sure you sort of do your homework beforehand, and that's probably one of the best ways to avoid getting sued is know what you're getting into and properly plan, any sort of endeavor that startup's going to be doing. So, harkening back to earlier discussion about founders agreements and shareholders agreements, having agreements like that in place, it would be one way to minimize one very common lawsuit that I see, which is a lawsuit that occurs between founders, where there is some sort of disconnect and tension that creates a dispute between founders. And the best example that I've seen over and over again is either a very poorly drafted founders agreement or shareholders agreement or no agreement that's prepared. And the founders that started the company down the road after the company now has either proven its success or is looking very likely that's going to be very successful. There's a difference in opinion as to who owns what shares in the company, where one founder may think that they had 60% and the other founder had 40%, and that view is not shared by the other founder. And so that oftentimes will create a lot of tension and has led to a number of disputes that ends up in a lawsuit. Other sorts of lawsuits we see that are common for startups, again, if the company's not properly prepared and doesn't do its homework and doesn't have good advisors, is some sort of regulatory issue that comes up. So depending on the space that the startup is in, if it's in a very heavily regulated space and those laws aren't applied with or complied with, there may be a lawsuit that comes from a regulatory agency. So for example, if you're a company that manufactures electronics goods and you don't get the proper FCC clearance, the FCC can take action to potentially fine and penalize the company if it's not in compliance, or potentially even shut down the company if it's in serious violation of the various regulations governing that. Other types of common lawsuits, I would say, would be employment-related lawsuits. So employment laws are very critical, especially for startups. As soon as you start employing people, then you have obligations to maintain and to comply with various labor laws and employment laws. And so we oftentimes see someone that joins the company doesn't feel they're being paid properly or that there's some improper act or a violation. And if that employee ends up leaving, oftentimes they'll file a complaint with the regulatory agency, the Labor Commission, and that can generate a lawsuit against the company, or a lawsuit brought by a disgruntled employee who leaves and then sues the company. So those are probably some of the more common types of lawsuits I've seen that come up from time to time. And again, the best way I've seen to protect against that is really to make sure you've got good advice from outside advisors and inside advisors to the company, making sure that the board's aware of what's going on and making decisions appropriately, and that you have good, solid contracts. That's oftentimes one barrier to having a lawsuit, is making sure that the agreements you have with various parties, be they employees, consultants, vendors, even investors, are very well drafted, well negotiated, and cover a lot of the sorts of issues that might otherwise lead to some sort of dispute or lawsuit.